In this video for English 2010, we want to talk about how to use sources to help you write an argumentative essay. So let's talk about an argument again. We previously mentioned that an argument in an academic sense is an opinion supported by reasons and evidence and examples. And so as you build your argument in your argumentative essay, you'll want to have your main idea, which is maybe your thesis statement, and then your body paragraphs will include the claims, or sometimes we call those the reasons, that you are using to convince your audience that your thesis statement is true. Now, within those body paragraphs, you're going to have topic sentences that state your reasons or your claims, but the other sentences in the paragraph are going to help explain those reasons or claims. And often those explanations come in the form of definitions of maybe words or explanations of ideas. How do they work? Why does that idea matter? Or what's the connection between the idea and other things? You might also need to provide some examples. So you can explain an idea or summarize an idea, but some readers really will have difficulty understanding that idea unless you give an example. And you may also want to provide evidence. You want to provide information from other sources that will support that idea. So that's where using sources becomes very important and helpful in these last two parts here. They can provide us with some good definitions. They can give us explanations of complex ideas. They can provide us with examples and other kinds of evidence, such as data, that might convince our readers that this claim or this reason is true or valid. So let's talk about three ways to use sources in a responsible way. And those are paraphrasing, summarizing, and quoting. First, let's start with paraphrase. So a paraphrase is using the same idea as a source, but you use different words to explain that same idea. And it's generally about the same length, number of words to explain it. Let's look at an example. Here's an article written by Gao and Ren about pluralism or multilingualism in China. And in the original article, they write, Tibetans constitute the largest ethnic minority group in the city. And the Tibetan language is offered by the school as extra academic subject. Okay, so that's the original text written by those authors. If we were to paraphrase it, we need to do a couple things. First, we need to make sure that we are acknowledging where the text came from. So we have to have some kind of citation. So that's usually in MLA style. We do this by using the author's name. There's two authors here, so we'll use both authors' names. Then the paraphrase comes in where we explain the same idea, and it's about the same length. Both of these are about one sentence long, but we've changed the grammar. Okay. And when you do a paraphrase, it's often helpful to read the idea, think about it, and then put the source away. Don't look at it. And think to yourself, now what did that idea say? Can I express that in my own words? And so I read the original sentence, and then I thought about, now what is the main idea that that sentence is getting at? Or what is the idea from that sentence that I best want to present? And if I do that without looking at the original source, it's easier for me to paraphrase. So I wrote, Gao and Ren report that native-speaking Tibetan students can enroll in Tibetan as a foreign language course in their local high schools. So same idea, but definitely different words. Now let's talk about summary. So summary is different from paraphrase. It's still the same idea. It's still using different words, but the difference here is that you're shortening it. So summary can happen when you maybe take a whole paragraph and you just want to summarize it in a couple sentences, or maybe even an entire article or a book, and you just want to summarize it into a much smaller, more condensed, what is the main idea of that? So let's look at an example. So here's a paragraph from the same article by Gao and Ren, but it's on a different topic. In this particular paragraph, they're talking about regional variations of the Chinese language. We call these dialects of Chinese. And there are many different dialects in China. the language that we often think of as Chinese or Mandarin Chinese in China is often referred to as Putonghua, the common language. And this is the language that's used officially by the government, and most public schools across the country are required to use this language. When I taught in China, there were signs on the wall in the school that said Putonghua only. You can only speak what we think of as Mandarin Chinese in the school. Now, most of the school teachers and students in the school, that's not their native language. They spoke different dialects from the neighboring villages and provinces. But in the school, they were required to speak this kind of common dialect. So this paragraph is about that variation. Now, when I taught in China almost 20 years ago, it was a lot more centralized and a lot more control of the central government and its language across the country. This paragraph is describing how that's changing. There's more regional autonomy and power of the different regions of China, and some of them are taking more control over their regional dialects, and they want to promote those and use them as official languages within their region. And this paragraph points out some of the advantages of that, but it also highlights some of the challenges of doing that. So I have read that whole paragraph, and I will now want to summarize it. And I've just done it in a sentence. Now, this is a pretty complex, it's a long sentence. Maybe it could have been 2 sentences, but here's how I summarized it. The recent rise of regional autonomy and independence in China has contributed to greater interest in preserving and promoting regional dialects. And this pursuit of multilingualism has both cultural and tourism benefits, but it also presents problems for migrants who are not familiar with local dialects and feel disadvantaged. And then in parentheses, I have my source, Gao and Run. Okay. So we can see here, this is a summary, same idea. Okay, I've left out a lot of the details and I've just summarized it into, in this case, just 1 sentence. But same idea, different words, shortened the length, and I've made sure that I've identified the source. Let's look at one more way that you could integrate source information into your writing, and this is through a quotation. So quotation uses the same words, same idea, and same length. You're not making many changes to it. So here's the original text. This is about another idea from the same Gao and Run article. In this one, they're talking about using teaching English in schools. And they write, subsequently, these initiatives to integrate the learning of English into the learning of particular academic subjects, referred to as bilingual education, have been growing rapidly across China. So I want to now maybe write a paragraph where I talk about bilingual education. Maybe my whole paper is about the use of teaching English in other parts of the world and whether it's effective or not. And I want to argue that there are, in many ways, it's not effective, but there are some strategies that schools or governments or other entities can use to make English learning more effective. And so I want to use this quote as an example to show one way that a government is making learning English more effective, because they're teaching it in the subject areas. It's not just a class on its own. It's not something that students don't care about and they don't use. It's integrated into their learning of other topics. So this is not going to be help explain and give an example and evidence for my argument. So I have written in my paragraph, sorry, it says paraphrase up there, but it's not, it's a quotation, okay? According to Gao and Run, these initiatives to integrate the learning of English into the learning of particular academic subjects, referred to as bilingual education, have been growing rapidly across China, and I provide the page number. Now you'll notice that after I introduce the source, according to Gao and Run, okay, and I have my comma, and then I'm gonna, what did they say? I got all of that in quotation marks, because these are the exact words from the source. I'm not changing the words. I'm not paraphrasing or summarizing them. I'm quoting them. So I need to let the reader know exactly when the borrowed words begin and when the borrowed words end. If I don't have those quotation marks, my reader won't know that these words came from the source. They'll think I'm paraphrasing or summarizing, and I'm not. I need to be really clear on that. I've also provided a page number. If you're using a source that does have page numbers, when you provide a quote, it's important to provide that page number. As we deal more and more with electronic sources, sometimes they don't have page numbers. MLA used to ask writers to provide paragraph numbers. In most recent versions I've seen, they don't require that. So if there is no page number, you don't have to provide it. But if there is, it's helpful for the reader. They could go back and specifically find where in that source it was found. If it's an electronic source, they can just search for the words on the web page and they'll be able to find the exact words. But you'll notice I still let my readers know that it came from the source, Gowan Run. And that's really important. I'm knowing that it comes from a source, and then I'm letting them know where the quotation begins and where the quotation ends. And I need to do that so that there's no confusion about which words I wrote and which words came from my source. Now, when I made reference to sources these 3 different times, I chose 3 different approaches, and you could use any of these approaches you like. One of them, I started off my sentence by saying, Gowan Run report that, and then I paraphrase or summarize, or I could even quote the idea. Okay, and I'm using this verb here, report. You could use other verbs. You could say argue that, or show that, or demonstrate that, or say that. Okay. Then the second one here I've got, I had the sentence, okay, which could have been a summary, a paraphrase, or maybe even a quote, as long as I've got quotation marks. And then at the end of that, I put in parentheses the names of the author, so that it lets the source know that everything in that idea that's in that sentence came from the source. It's not an idea I invented myself. I learned it from the source. If you want to know more about this idea, go look at the source. The third example is also begins at the beginning of the sentence, and I have according to Gowan Run. When you use the phrase according to, you don't need to use a verb like report or says or shows. According to does that. It functions kind of like the verb. So then after the comma, what you put is your summary, your paraphrase, or your quote. You don't need to have a verb. Would never write, according to Gowan Run, they say that. No, don't put the they say that, because that's what according to means. All right. So those are just 3 different ways that you could acknowledge to the reader that the idea in these sentences come from sources. So these 2 different ways I've done it. One of them we often call parenthetical citation, okay? And it's because in parentheses at the end of the sentence, I've indicated what source the idea came from. The other kinds of in-text citations are called narrative. Narrative means that I've integrated the name of the source into my sentence. And so whether you do it the Gowan Run report, the report or say or demonstrate or show or argue that, or you do the according to source, okay, and then have the idea follow. You can do parenthetical or narrative. Both are acceptable, and you can use them both for summarizing, paraphrasing, or quotation. The only thing you need to remember is with quotation, make sure you've got those opening and closing quotation marks so that the reader knows exactly when the words are borrowed and when the borrowed words end, and we go back to your own writing. Okay, so I hope this has helped you see how you can use sources to support your arguments. As you build your argument with your claims and your reasons, then think about, do you need some sources to help explain ideas, define terms, give examples, or show evidence to build up your argument? If you do, let's use these sources to do that. And the most frequent way that we use sources is through paraphrase, summary, and quotation. I hope this helps you feel more comfortable and confident integrating your sources into your argumentative paper.